within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. This Honourable House now resume its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mr. Whittle, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahuford, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Mr. Luther Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Miss Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Miss Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Bars, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright. Nobody came in, please.
Statements by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, while I did my statement, the opposition spokesman, the member from East Kingston and Port Royal, asked for some documents, which I have now to hand to him. You don't say anything until NEC. In addition to that, Mr. Skeffrey will deal with you. Yes. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, the member, I don't come here for no controversy. Speaker warned me. The member asked how much has been earned since 2016. $10.7 million has been earned from the new arrangement since 2016. He further asked, Mr. Speaker, what is the duration of the agreement? The agreement started from the letter of intent was signed in 2016. It is for 25 years. But because the innovation agreement was only recently signed, we now have some 23 years and 2 months left on the arrangement. It is also to be pointed out, Mr. Speaker, that the agreement is to be reviewed every 3 years. So the next period of review to the agreement will be in 2019, July 2019. Because in 2016, when the arrangement was done and the letter of intent was signed, it took into consideration the levy regime that was enjoyed by Noranda at the time, which was $1.50 US per ton. And what we went further to do, Mr. Speaker, is to add the 17.33%, so that if they made no profit, we would get the $1.50, as was the agreement before Noranda went bankrupt. And if they made a profit, we would also share in that profit the 17.33%. It's in the agreement. The special mining license was asked, and the question was whether it encroached on the new cockpit country boundaries. Mining license, the existing mining license was cancelled, and the new lease 173, is located 120 square meters in the parishes of St. Anne and Trelawney. They are west of Toboski and extend down to Bryant's Castle in St. Anne and further over to Cholosi, Penn, Sawyers up to Stewarttown in Trelawney. And Mr. Speaker, these areas are outside the established boundaries of the cockpit country. And to make a correction, the member made yesterday, sir, an assertion that it was the government itself who started the petition. The government wouldn't want to take credit because it was the Jamaica Environmental Trust who started the petition, and a lot of Jamaicans signed on so that we could establish finally and have gazetted the boundaries of the cockpit country. The other question that was asked was what was the value paid to settle the workers' outstanding payments. Some $5.3 million US was paid. Mr. Speaker, it is not strange or unusual for ministers to waive portions of the levy depending on the circumstances at the time. And in 2016, the prevailing conditions dictated that in the discussions with the company, because I believe the member coined a philosophy while he was minister of the 3 C's, I'm told: community, company, and country. That those had to be taken into consideration when you are negotiating. That's what I was told at the ministry. So I don't know if it is so. And, well, that's what I was told. You like them. However, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, when Noranda went bankrupt and friends were few, New Day Alumina came along, the negotiations took place, and the levy regime at the time was continued. However, with the profit share and the new agreement, we built in a safeguard so that after 3 years, the arrangements can be and will be reviewed. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, only one company today will have to pay the full levy, and that's at Windalco, because their waiver period expired at the end of March this year. So as of the 1st of April, they will have to pay the full levy as is calculated. All other companies have some kind of regime that has been negotiated or was and agreed to them to keep them while there was a downturn. Now that the industry is a lot more buoyant, we are moving to treat with and to recover as much as is possible. So that is why Windalco's application to the Ministry of Finance for an extension in their waiver was turned down. And we are looking, for example, at Jamaica. They are making some claims, and the Bauxite Institute has already indicated that they have an amount of $8 million outstanding, and we are moving to recover it because the member rightfully said we don't have to be sorry for the companies, and they're not sorry for us to give us what is rightfully due to the Jamaican people. So, Mr. Speaker, I am hopeful that I was able to treat with some of the issues raised and remain available to the Honourable Member.
Mr. Colwell.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister for providing me with a copy, I think, of the establishment agreement. Yes. Yes. Mr. Speaker, I think a point that eluded us yesterday was the point that was made by the Minister. And again, he's new, so he can't share all the blame. But remember, this matter started in 2016, and nothing was concretized until recently. So in the 2-year period, we've been shipping out bauxite on the basis of a verbal contract. All right, so without a formal agreement being in place. But, Mr. Speaker, a more germane point has to do with the information that the Minister just gave, because yesterday, when I gave the assessment as to how much has been earned in the 2-year period, I gave a higher figure for the company than what the Minister done. Yes, for the period. The Minister, I had given 13.25 million, but you're now saying it was in fact 10.75. So instead of the difference being 25 million US dollars, is actually 27 million US dollars. So it's a lot more money that we would have collected if the bauxite levy was in place. I want the Minister to check on the previous arrangement with Noranda, because we went and fought an arbitration and won in that battle. And my recollection is that it wasn't on the basis of $1.50, but more than that. And I will be able to, if I had known that you were going to come back with a statement today, I would have provided you with the actual award that the arbitrators gave to the government of Jamaica, gave to the parties during that time. But an astounding revelation today from the Minister, which again flies in the face of policy that was announced by the Minister of Finance, the previous Minister of Finance, last year. You have just said that Windalco does not benefit today from any waivers. You are saying that they pay the full bauxite levy. That's what you've just said. That's what you've just said. So when the Minister of Finance came and announced last year that he has granted a waiver of the bauxite levy for 5 years, starting last year, you are now saying that that is not so. Minister, the Minister of Finance last year announced that he was granting a waiver for 5 years to Windalco. Unless you're saying that he has cancelled that grant and is now charging the company the full waiver, the full levy? I'd like you to answer that. Mr. Speaker, the Minister spoke about the cockpit country. And the point I was making yesterday was a broader point. Because last year the Prime Minister came and gave this Parliament and the country the impression that we had settled this issue of the cockpit country, that there will be no more mining in the cockpit country. And today we know that the matter is not settled because there is no definition as yet, no delineation of the cockpit country as yet. There is no resolution that has been brought to this Parliament declaring the cockpit country a mining-free area. And it is only when you do that that you can truly state that there will be no mining in the cockpit country. My understanding is that you're still not settled on the boundaries. And you still haven't explained to me why you have given the expansion in the reserves to New Day, when, as far as I'm aware, it's not necessary at this time.
Mr. Speaker, let me treat with the last issue first. The country is well aware, and I believe the member too, when the Prime Minister, after a long process of consultation, went through and showed it here in the Parliament and showed the boundaries of the cockpit country. I remember the Prime Minister had a pointer, which the color of the pointer was objectionable to some members of the House, and he actually changed it. And he did on the screens. So the boundaries were clearly shown. Well, the boundaries that were shown, it is the boundaries that we treat with. However, in addition to the license, member, Mr. Speaker, sorry, in addition to the license, the company has to apply for an a condition of the license is that they have to apply for an environmental permit from NEPA before mining can take place. That's one of the conditions. The question, Mr. Speaker, of the why give more reserves. At the time when New Day came to take over the Noranda operations, New Day was willing in 2016 to take up all the liabilities of Noranda. They were willing to partner with the government to protect the welfare of the workers. And they were also willing to embark on a scheme of investment, capital investment in the plant. And in 2016, while the discussions were going on, Mr. Speaker, everybody thought it was a good deal at the time, and that is why the safeguard was built in for the review every 3 years. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, Noranda has enjoyed concessions on the levy since 2009. The concession then saw the government getting 4.4 million less, in 10, 31 million, in 11, 33, in 12, 24, in 13, 21, and in 14, 21, in 15, 10. So there has been over the period, and during this period the industry was in a downturn, and Noranda enjoyed that wave, and when they went bankrupt and New Day came on, the same things were applied, and this information I got from the Institute. But the member says he has other information, and I'll be willing to look at the additional information. As it is regards to the Windalco situation, an application was made, and I don't know if the intent was to carry through. But because of the upturn in the market, one had to relook. But I hope the member is not confusing that situation with a situation in 2015, where the member in a statement, witness statement to the arbitrators, clearly said Cabinet considered my submission. And on February 17, 2014, following the advice from the Attorney General, approved an extension of the concession to Windalco. So I hope you're not mixing up that extension. But as far as I have been advised, is that the concession for Windalco came to an end in March of this year. And because of the buoyancy in the industry, we felt that we have been giving concessions over the last couple of years, so it is time that the people of Jamaica enjoy the full rate of the levy.
Mr. Speaker, I would like, probably not today, but I would like for the Minister to provide this House with a statement in relation to what has been earned in relation to the bauxite levy, and probably your colleague, the Minister of Finance, might want to assist because he has courage of the issue of the bauxite levy. I am still of the view, based on what the Minister of Finance had said last year, that a 5-year concession was granted to Windalco. And I need to know that that has been cancelled, because that's what you're saying. Your colleague behind you, is your colleague behind you verifying that? Because you're saying that it was cancelled. No, tell me what you're saying.
I am saying that the concession that was granted to Windalco came to an end in March, the end of March 2018, came to an end.
So, today, Windalco is paying the full bauxite levy, which is $8 per ton. Yes, approximately $8 per ton. And you're confirming that to me in this Parliament.
Member, since there is some amount of controversy, but the information I have is that the concession came to an end at the end of March, and the full levy is due from Windalco. But you are speaking with such confidence that my mother would warn me to say make haste slowly. So I will go back and double check, because I don't want to mislead you.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I had asked about the issue of the profit in the operation and on which part of the business the profit is based, whether it's the alumina production or the aluminum production side of the business, and you have not responded to that.
Speaker, I did, sir, but let me repeat. The profit share is on the Jamaican part of the business as well as the U.S. part of the business. All the entities owned by New Day Alumina Holdings, which is the parent company. So we share from the local operations, because not all the bauxite that is mined goes to Louisiana. Some is sold into other markets, and we share profits there, and what goes to Louisiana into the refinery, we share in that as well, sir.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the Honourable Minister. Now that we have had some clarification, Minister, on the bauxite level and the profit sharing, could you say what level of assistance will be coming to the bauxite producing constituencies, and in particular South Manchester, which has been devastated over the past number of years?
Mr. Speaker, a very good question from the member from South Manchester. The Community Development Fund, which is administered through the Jamaica Bauxite
Order, please.
Institute, is the chief collector of those funds, and there is a formula which is applied to communities within the bauxite mining area, which I'm sure you're well aware of. I don't have before me the precise amount for your constituency, but you know that we have been in discussions because there are a particular issue in your constituency that has been brought to my attention, and you are well aware because I've gotten your letters, and we have had discussions that were not in writing, verbally. We have had many meetings with the Honourable gentleman, and he is confident that his issues are being dealt with.
Mr. Samuda, Leader, announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Ministry paper number.
Order, please.
Ministry paper number 88, an annual report of the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission for the year 2016-2017. Ministry paper number 89, an annual report of the Cayman's Track Limited for the year 2016-2017. Ministry paper number 90, an annual report of the Jamaica Deposit Insurance Corporation for the year 2016-2017.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally.
Mr. Speaker, you will recall that yesterday at this item the Prime Minister took the motion, presented the motion on the Emergency Powers number 2, continuance number 3 resolution 2018, which is listed on the order paper at item number 10. This is intended to be taken further today, and in that regard we expect that contributions will be made on this matter by the opposition. So, Mr. Speaker, at this time we will await the contribution of members of the opposition. Well,
Mr. Speaker,
I'm just giving notice of what is to come.
I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House I'll move to introduce and have read for a first time a bill shortly entitled the Financial Institutions Vesting of Assets in Pan-Caribbean Merchant Bank Limited, Order 2000, Validation Act 2018.
Prime Minister. One minute. 1 minute. Oh, sir. Not yet, Prime Minister. Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Prime Minister. Yes.
No, this matter, Mr. Speaker, this matter was opened by the Prime Minister yesterday, but gave no. No, this one, state of emergency.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, but.
Yeah, that'll be very short. So that members are clear, Mr. Speaker, is what we're doing. Because we did not have agreement yesterday to proceed, the leader of the opposition had indicated that it would be a tidier way of conducting the business if we dealt with the Zozo, and he asked that if persons who spoke on the Zozo matter would be able to speak on the state of emergency matter when it was taken. So now I'm going through the formalities of making a brief introduction on the request for the extension of the zone of special operation for North St. Catherine, which I didn't do yesterday. It may be very brief because I know members had other plans today. And for the records, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful that the opposition has agreed that we would meet today to go through this. Mr. Speaker, on the 18th of March 2018, His Excellency the Governor General declared a state of public emergency in the St. Catherine North Police Division for a period of 14 days. This concluded on the 31st of March 2018. Following this, a submission to extend the state of public emergency for a period of 90 days following the initial period was approved by Parliament. The ensuing success and positive impact on the quality of life in the division resulted in a recommendation for a further extension of another 90 days. This was approved and is scheduled to expire on the 2nd of October 2018. Today, as the end of the period of extension is imminent, it is timely that we again consider the recommendation of the security forces to approve another extension in the public's interest. This is deemed to be necessary to satisfy the short to medium term objectives of the special measure. Importantly, it will reinforce the pillars of transformation that will be seen as part of the long-term results of these actions. Mr. Speaker, for many years, public order and peace have evaded the division. Once home to Jamaica's capital city and the hub of commerce, governance, prestigious architecture, and educational and health facilities, Spanish Town in particular has today been robbed of its significance. It has been stripped of its legacy and its historical importance to the country. And Mr. Speaker, we should do everything in our power to reclaim Spanish Town. Mr. Speaker, I have heard the complaints made by both representatives of constituencies that make up the division. I have had business people call me directly regarding the operating times, which have been restricted due to the state of public emergency. They all agree that they feel safer. They all agree that the quality of life in the area has improved. They all agree that criminal activities are receding. What they would like to see happen is a more considerate application of the restrictions on business time and other restrictions that affect commerce. I want to report today, Mr. Speaker, that I have had that discussion with the Commissioner of Police, and the police command is amenable to making those changes. The police is now, as we speak, Mr. Speaker, they are now making their own assessment as to how they could loosen the restriction. The Minister of National Security has said to me that at a later stage he will come to the House to make the announcement as to what the relief would be. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to point out that since the intervention, that is over the period 18th of March to the 2nd of September 2018, the division has recorded 27 murders and 22 shootings. This amounts to a 68% reduction in the collective number of murders and shootings over the period of the intervention. when compared to the equivalent period of time prior to the state of emergency and the start of the year. So, in essence, 82 murders and 72 shootings were recorded over a period of 168 days prior to the state of emergency. That would be from the 1st of January 2018 to the calling of the state of emergency, while only 27 murders and 22 shootings were recorded in the 168 days after the state of emergency was called. So there is no question, Mr. Speaker, that the measure has been effective. Mr. Speaker, communities like Ellerslie Pen, Capture Land, Jones Avenue, the Spanish Town Center, De La Vega City, March Pen, Brooklyn, Thompson Pen, Victoria District, all these communities are very grateful for the state of emergency. All these communities have benefited, and I have a particularly empathetic view on the matter because, Mr. Speaker, I was born in Spanish Town, in the heart of Spanish Town. I know all these communities and I know all the problems there. And Spanish Town, Mr. Speaker, is a gem for us. If we were able to reclaim Spanish Town from the criminal gangs and we were able to make the investment to restore the historical buildings and the cultural sites that are there and really restore Spanish Town, we would have a treasure. We would have a treasure. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that it is not the proposition that the state of emergency will do this. Indeed, we can't rely on the state of emergency as the long-term solution. But as it stands now, this problem, which did not start a year ago, this problem is more than 3 or 4 decades. It is not going to be solved overnight. Whilst we are using the state of emergency as a tool to create a period of quiet, the police are working to transform how they operate. So, Mr. Speaker, they are moving now from operations-based to more investigations-based strategies. So you would see, and you would have seen in the media, that several gang leaders have been arrested, and we are breaking gangs, which is very important. Mr. Speaker, we are gathering greater intelligence. We are building greater networks of cooperation in the communities. And ultimately, it is this better policing that will lead to the sustainable reduction in crime. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I want to recommend the extension to the House, and I ask for the support of the members.
Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I? Mr. Speaker, the resolution has been brought. The resolution has been brought, and the security forces, as the Prime Minister has indicated, in the face of a reduction in the number of murders, which we all appreciate, the security forces have recommended an extension of the state of emergency in North St. Catherine Police Division, this time until January 2nd. That will in effect be 9 months, I believe. of a state of emergency in the particular division, and if it is extended further, by March we will have had 1 year. Now, it still begs the question, Mr. Speaker, even as we support the extension, it still begs the question of what are we to expect and what is the medium to longer term plan. The Prime Minister has indicated that there is a shift from operations-based to investigations-based activity by the police. But a number of questions arise. As I said, apart from a state of emergency, what is the longer-term plan that is in place to allow us to sustain this level of reduction in criminal activity? That is one question that must be asked. If we are to answer that, then the question also would arise, what of the other police divisions, the other parishes that are seeing, as a consequence of the redeployment of personnel, among other things, an increase in criminal activity and in murders specifically? I speak about places like East Kingston, St. Andrew Central, St. Thomas, Trelawney, among others, parts of parishes, Westmoreland included, that while it is said, and the Prime Minister yesterday said there's a more rational deployment of human resources, and yes, to some degree, that will have occurred, because there was no doubt that St. Catherine North and St. James reflected an untenable situation. But it is also the case, based upon our discussions with the law officers on the ground, that the police in some of these divisions feel that they don't have adequate resources to enable them to effectively police those divisions in which there is now resurgent criminal activity and murders. Not only do we need to know, but more importantly, the people in those communities need to have some sense of what is the longer-term plan that is going to enable them to enjoy a similar measure of calm and security as is occurring in North St. Catherine. Then, while it is true, third issue, while it is true that we have received no reports of widespread abuse of people's rights, the question nevertheless remains, what of even those few cases where there are problems, and you have addressed some of the problems that have arisen. But we know, for example, that Jamaica's economy involves a lot of what we might call informal economic activity. The pan chicken man and woman selling in the evening, the soup man. Last week, a young lady, let us call her Suzette, has her birthnight party where she earns a little extra to fashion her to buy stock for her vending trade. But at some hour, 9 or something in the evening, she's told, despite having put all of these, all her beer and liquor and whatnot on ice, that she must close down her birthday party, which is part of her annual earning plan. She must close it down and send home all the people. There goes, she has invested in this stock. She's relying for her vending business on the earnings from that night. She's a victim of criminality, yes, but she's also a victim of the solution that is being found. There were 2 young barbers reported to us who have their shop that operate in the evening time as well as in the day, but you know, people come home from work, stop at the barber shop, told to lock it down. In this case, they have been charged. The point I'm making, Prime Minister, is that an indefinite prolongation, an indefinite continuation of this situation is unhealthy to the economy in the community. It is unhealthy to the relationship between the people and the security forces, and it is generally unhealthy to the range of rights that we have come to expect. Because what all of this is posing and what it leads to, in my mind, is a simple question. Can we both enjoy our democratic rights to which we have become accustomed and at the same time enjoy an adequate level of security? Because ultimately what we seek is a return to normal existence without excess criminality, and at the same time we want to be able to have every citizen enjoy, yes, the right to life, but also the other set of rights to go out on the street uninterrupted by criminals, but also without let and hindrance from the authorities. We have an emergency situation, but we need to know where we are going to get to that point. How long are we to ask the people in the communities to forego the enjoyment of those rights? Are we to expect them to forego those rights for the rest of the term of the administration? I would think not. I would hope not. But at the same time, we can't simply operate on the basis of some sort of trust. Trust is good, but it needs to be accompanied, like every relationship must be accompanied, every healthy relationship, with good communication. And we need to have that level of good communication now. What is the overall environment in the country that is going to advance the security interests of the country? I don't know. We see, all of us have seen reports in the media that suggest that our usual intelligence cooperation with the ABC countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, is under pressure, and that new cooperators are different countries are being selected as the main cooperators in this. I don't know if it is true or not true, but those are reports that have been received. we have heard from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but we haven't heard from the other countries involved who have made no comment one way or the other. But I would want to say, for whatever it's worth, we need to know what the situation is. One of the things about the pattern of cooperation that used to exist is that all sides in that cooperation, Jamaica, the other three countries, understand the framework in which we operated, understand also the nature of the protections in law that exist in the countries with whom we cooperate. We need to be assured that anybody else with whom we are cooperating in that regard has the same democratic traditions, has the same protections in their own legislation, have the same orientation toward the protection of people's rights. You know, it is said that there is a new phenomenon emerging in the global community, the so-called surveillance state, where the combination of new surveillance technologies and undemocratic political practices combines to place every citizen's privacy in doubt. One of the things that useful communication about our own security plans would do is convince us and all Jamaicans that this type of phenomenon could never occur here. These are real issues on which we need to be reassured as a country. And quite frankly, the fundamental question that we pose is how and by what means are we going to proceed? Having addressed the emergency, by what means are we going to get to the point where the full-fledged democratic rights of citizens will not be curtailed in any way, shape, or form, and whereby we will be enabled to enjoy a secure and safe environment. It is not intended by our Constitution that we should have a never-ending state of emergency, not in North St. Catherine, not in St. James, not in any part of Jamaica. It's enormous powers that, even if not now abused, these are enormous powers which should not exist in perpetuity. And so, in supporting this extension, we are asking for some answers.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Jackson.
I enjoy just a few comments further to the remarks made by the Leader of the Opposition. And I want to pick up on a point that he left on, is the whole question of security operations, particularly in the area of surveillance. In the affected areas, particularly the one in question, North St. Catherine, while the residents welcome the reduction of the murders and the shootings, and let me preface my comments, Mr. Speaker, to make the point. We welcome the reduction in the murders and the shootings. all the urgings that we have been making for over a year or so is towards getting a reduction in the numbers. So let it be clearly understood that we are in full support of the reduction of the murders and the shootings to create an aura, a sense, a feeling of security on the part of every single Jamaican in those areas where the state of emergency exists and throughout Jamaica. The question is, what price do we pay or have to pay to achieve that? Regrettably, the government has elected to resort to the most extreme, which is the state of emergency. The most extreme in order to reduce murder and the shootings which we have. And as was said by the leader of the opposition, the constitutional provisions allow for interim, short-term intervention to deal with emergencies, like what we had, because what we have is really a runaway situation over the past 2 years. Second highest in Jamaica's history. That is really abnormal. And having resorted to the most extreme, we are having an ongoing repetition, ongoing extension. The message we are conveying, Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, is that crime reduction goes hand in hand with a military police operation on an ongoing basis. We said at the early stage, when we approved the first extension, without any reservation, but we said further, tell us what your medium to long-term plan is. We have asked for it then, we're not asking anew. We are yet to get that. When we made a call for the crime plan, Mr. Speaker, it's not just an abstract notion. It's to give us, not the opposition, the people of Jamaica, a sense of what is required, a sense of what you are pursuing to be done to bring the society in a state of peacefulness or reduction of crime generally. That's what a crime plan that we ask for seek to obtain, so that we are all on board. Not just to know, but to also be able to contribute towards achieving that goal. Because crime reduction is not an achievement of the government or the opposition. It's an achievement of Jamaica and Jamaicans. But what we are having now, Mr. Speaker, which is of concern to me personally, is that crime reduction means state of emergency. It means an unusual and ongoing presence of the military and the police in order to reduce crime and violence. That is one of the concerns we have. Now, when I intimated about the information that we sought about the achievement of the crime, the murders and so forth, again, it's not just to get numbers. By the way, after leaving here yesterday, I resend the set of requests to the minister. I haven't gotten it yet. And the truth, to be reasonable, it's a short time between yesterday and today. So I couldn't even say the minister is unreasonable not to give it to me before we come here this afternoon. And that is part of why we made the complaint. We have no data. What is that data? We tried to find out during the period, say between from the last one to now, what are the number of detention, arrests? How many of those persons that the Prime Minister you alluded to gang members and leaders? Give us numbers. Those are vague, broad responses that really don't go too far. That's the kind of information that we are trying to get an appreciation of what we are achieving during this cooling off period, so to speak, because the state of emergency put everything basically on hold and give the security forces basically free rein. What are the crimes, persons who are charged? What are the offenses? What are the weapons that are seized during this period that we can measure in some qualitative and quantitative way? When I look on this, the crime stats, Prime Minister, that you refer to what we have, when you look at this year as against last year, just under 8,000 guns and ammunition has been recovered, as against 14,000 plus for the same period last year. That means it's a significant reduction in our success to get all of the weapons that contribute to the murders and the shootings. Those are the kinds of information we need to look at to see what we are achieving. Because, Mr. Speaker, we can have the crime, the state of emergency, bring this reduction, but the persons who are responsible for those murders that used to take place and no longer taking place, they are still out there. And we have no sense of us going into a state of sustainable crime reduction. So again, Mr. Prime Minister, these are some of the ways that the opposition can attempt to assist the government. We can't just come and just clap and cheer every time you come for an extension without no basis of giving that support. And I want to also use the opportunity to applaud the security forces who are at the front of it. They are the ones, when we talk in here, they are the ones who are out there day and night on our behalf, fighting criminals. And I'm going to reiterate the point made by my colleague from North Clarendon yesterday about the wage settlement. Now, Mr. Speaker, in all fairness, if we are really sincere about crime reduction, if we are really sincere about the men and women who are at the front on our behalf, the very least we can do are those doable things, such as settle the wage matter. That is Mr. Speaker, wage settlement is not something new. My colleague from North Clarendon have been in that position before. I have been there many times over. We settle these things. One of the things that I have come to appreciate, Mr. Speaker, these things, though they seem small, they impact on each police officer and members of their families significantly. Significantly. We have many challenges in the country, we know that. And we have had many challenges. But for heaven's sake, why can't we do the doable things? Why? Just a wage settlement, you have to agree on numbers and terms. You don't have to go invent anything and create anything. You just need to sit around the table in a responsible and respectful way. We have been there, we have done it, we know it can be done. And so I want to use this opportunity to call on the Prime Minister to instruct that this matter be settled in a matter of days. It has been going on for too long. When I was minister in charge of wage negotiations and settlement, my Prime Minister instruct that I have the settlement done within a period of time. Even if I have to stay there 24 hours per day. Right? He gives instruction to bring it to a conclusion when I sit around the table with the police. Right? Understanding very much that at the end of a negotiation, we all have to work together. Because we as political persons are not the one doing the work. It is the men and women out there. And that's the reason why respect is an imperative in this process. They are the ones who we have to work with. It is the police that make the minister look good or don't look good. They are your partners. So I'm pleading to you, Mr. Prime Minister. This is going on too long. You can't have an outstanding wage settlement for over a year with the police when crime and violence is the #1 challenge that faces the country. It just don't pencil out. If you need help, Mr. Prime Minister, we'll help you to reach those settlements. We will help. Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, you raised about the conditions of the state of emergency. And I had indicated earlier on, the residents in the affected area welcome the reduction. Part of it is in my constituency too, that is affected, in the North St. Catherine Police Division. And so I speak to them, my constituents, my local bosses, but they don't want their freedom to be perpetually hanging in the balance. They welcome the reduction in the murder. They welcome the fact that they can walk the street with a greater sense of freedom. They do. But at the same time, they're struggling with the restriction. They ask me the question, MP, is it in order to feel safe we can't do anything else, or we do it under restriction? I can't give them the answer. I come to you for the answer, as the leader of the opposition asks, Mr. Prime Minister. For the local economy in the area, I had discussion with the minister earlier on today, and I resumed the discussion later on thereafter. The business hours of operation. My information, Prime Minister, to move the hours up to say midnight is not going to overwhelm, is not going to compromise. And what's 8 o'clock now, right? To 10. Why not go to midnight, right? I'm saying in the whole scheme of things with the remaining, I am proposing on behalf of the many small business persons who have made representation to me. My phone was ringing off the hook today when they heard that we're going to have the debate today to say allow them to conduct their business. Because as the leader of the opposition said, Prime Minister, it's not only the business persons, the small business operators, and particularly the small and micro businesses, it is the persons who they serve in those communities that are also inconvenienced by the absence of the services that they provide. These are not people who have a lot of money, can travel and utilize many options. They have to utilize those which are more economical in their space. So I want to make an appeal for the security forces to move the hour up to a later period, and even say Friday and Saturday night, weekend night, which is a high commercial period, right? Even to go another hour or two on those 2 nights, weekend nights. When, Mr. Prime Minister, when the people feel safe or safer by the virtue of the presence of the police, you want them to also have a better quality of life. In the midst of it, they must be able to enjoy their lives. After all, they make many sacrifices. Because many of them, the prosperity don't really reach them yet. So, for what they earn, right, and the sacrifices that they make, we need to allow them to enjoy themselves a little more. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Prime Minister, it can't be indefinite. Come January, it will be 1 year altogether in Jamaica, not in St. Catherine, but that we have the state of emergency. And trust me, 1 year of military rule in those areas. 1 year of military rule in those areas. That cannot be the solution for all of Jamaica. With those words, Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Speaker.
Mr. Tweed.
I'll be very brief, Mr. Speaker. What the Prime Minister mentioned in his opening, the state of emergency allowing for, his words, the pillars of transformation, which would lead to a long-term solution. Would the Prime Minister describe those pillars of transformation that are inherent in the present operation of the state of emergency. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I think the subject has been thoroughly debated, having sought so many extensions, and the issues have been aired in this forum. A member from Central Kingston asked, what are some of the other things that are being done to transform the police force whilst they have the ability to use extraordinary powers? Yes, in the communities. So there are two levels of operation, Mr. Speaker, and I don't want to go into too much details, but the Commissioner has indicated that he is in a process of making certain changes in the structure of the police force. You would have seen the rollout of the new public safety and traffic enforcement branch, and that is going to be scaled island-wide. That includes, Mr. Speaker, not just an organizational change, but also the acquisition of resources to support the organizational change. So there is a plan to acquire greater mobility, and I use the term generally because when we speak of mobility, people think of motor cars, but there are other forms. So it is to give greater capacity, and who knows, maybe helicopters and other kinds of mobility. So it is to give the force greater capability in the area of mobility, and that is being done. The Leader of the Opposition spoke to a very important aspect of our national security, and that is intelligence. The JCF and other law enforcement agencies, including the JDF, we are constantly in a process of trying to improve our intelligence framework. You mentioned, Leader of the Opposition, articles that have come out in our national newspapers. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, as we are warned in the standing orders about questions that come from the newspaper, that we can't really refer to them as evidentiary documentation. So I am not going to go too much further than to say.
You're not saying fake news.
No, I said evidentiary. I put it a slightly different way. That the concerns that has caused in the society, we cannot ignore it. But suffice to say that as far as my information goes and my intelligence goes, that the government of Jamaica has not changed policy as it relates to the cooperation with our traditional partners. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I wish to assure the Leader of the Opposition that we are trying to strengthen, if anything, the cooperation between us. Granted, we always have to ensure that the legal basis of the cooperation is solid. We always seek to ensure that. We as well, Mr. Speaker, are always looking for new avenues of cooperation. And we are pursuing that with our traditional partners, what the term we use, the ABC partners. But Mr. Speaker, there are new partners as well, and meaning the Americans, the British, and the Canadians. There are other countries as well that we seek to cooperate with. Mr. Speaker, we have sent delegations to Colombia, for example. Yes, to see what they are doing with their policing. Colombia has assisted us. We are acquiring resources from them. And there are other countries. So, Mr. Speaker, 2 budget presentations ago, I informed the House of Plan Secure Jamaica and the strategic overall framework of putting together a national security plan, which was not just about the JCF and the JDF, but to secure Jamaica totally, secure our infrastructure, in terms of our road, our telecommunication, our banking. Mr. Speaker, one area of cooperation, and I want the leader of the opposition to understand this, that one area of cooperation that the government has to pursue and that we have not paid a great deal of attention to in the past, and which is emerging now as not just a global threat, but also a threat here, is our cyber security. And one of the leading nations in the world for cyber security is Israel. So, Mr. Speaker, I want it to be absolutely clear that we are cooperating with many countries around the world to build our capacity in all kinds of areas, which when put together forms Plan Secure Jamaica. It doesn't mean in any way that there is any change or shift in the cooperation between our traditional partners. That's not the case. In fact, we are intensifying our cooperation with our traditional partners. But as we seek to create the security umbrella for Jamaica, it means that if technology exists in a particular area where people have a particular expertise, then by all means Jamaica has to get access to that technology. Mr. Speaker, I will be saying some more about what Jamaica intends to do about its cybersecurity. Many persons here would have had knowledge of certain things that have happened 2 or 3 weeks ago, which created some disruption. Jamaica cannot be caught flat-footed in regards to its cybersecurity. So we're moving forward, Mr. Speaker, in ensuring that we are covered. I want to address. Mr. Speaker, just in closing, I want to repeat the point. The concentration of our security resources in areas where crime is elevated above what normal security can do does not mean the deprivation of other areas of resources. I think members of this House should accept that there are some communities in Jamaica where the level of crime is over and above what standard policing can manage. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, if we are to make a meaningful impact on these communities, we have to concentrate and strategically allocate the necessary resources to disrupt, clear, hold, and build those areas. Mr. Speaker, I hear complaints of the MP in East Kingston and Port Royal. I hear the complaints of what was happening in the St. Andrews South Division, where my constituency forms part of it, Western, part of Southwest and South. I hear those complaints. I'm getting the complaints from Augustown in Eastern. And I hear and Central and parts of Central. And I hear clearly the complaints of the Member of Parliament from Westmoreland Western. The Member of Parliament from Eastern Westmoreland used to complain vociferously. No, but Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the member from Western Westmoreland that the situation has my attention. The response, we have done some changes in terms of the top leadership of the security forces there. We have sent in some manpower. I take careful note of what you said about mobility, and I'm having a word with the minister and the commissioner to address it. I don't want to say too much, but there is a medium-term plan to address the situation in Westmoreland. The parish of Westmoreland has grown over the last 30 years, outpacing the security apparatus to manage such growth. And the truth is that there is a certain level of lawlessness that has to be addressed. It has literally overtaken the capacity of the existing law enforcement that exists. And so the strategy, Member of Parliament, can't be just sending a little bit of police or some resources, which we do when there is a flare-up. But I want to assure you that there is a medium-term plan to address it. I think the country should become used to the use of special measures to address areas where it is clear that the level of criminality is over and above what the police can handle. But the country should rest assured that this is not the long-term solution. I want to repeat that point, Leader of the Opposition. I know that we cannot rely on this forever. There comes a time when the expenditure of the resource to have an elevated level of police presence yields little result. When we are at that point, I'll be the first not to come here, but to just allow it to lapse. What we don't want, however, is for the criminals to ever get in their minds that the government will not use extraordinary powers to address the threat that they pose. That is what we so right now, Mr. Speaker, we know that the gangs are uncertain as to when this will end. We know that the criminals have to be thinking twice about where they locate and how they operate their criminal organization. Right now, we have, as a country, the upper hand, and we should use it judiciously, we should use it wisely, and we should never give away our strategic intent. Mr. Speaker, I rest my request and ask you to put the matter to the vote.
Well said.
I'm sorry. The question is that the motion on item 10 and the order paper be approved. Madam Clerk, please administer the roll call. Order, please.
Mr. R. Scott, Mr. Azan, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Bartlett, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown,
Dave,
Dr. Brownberg. No.
Members, please listen to your name.
Aye or no?
Too much discussion. Mr. Brown was called and you don't hear up to now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, he's not here today. Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell. Yes. Dr. Chang.
Dr. Chang. Yes.
Mr. Chuck. Mr. Clark. Mr. Heroy Clark.
Aye.
Dr. Nigel Clark. Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn. Ms. Daly. Mr. Daly. Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert. Dr. Dunn. Mr. Fagan. Dr. Ferguson. Mr. Golding. Ms. Grange. Mr. Floyd Green. Dr. Guy. Ms. Hannah. Mr. Hales. Mr. Henry. Mr. Henry. Mr. Holness. Mrs. Holness.
Aye.
Mr. Hutchinson. Mr. Hilton. Mr. Jackson. Mr. Kellier. Mrs. Malahoo Ford. Mr. Main. Mr. Mackenzie. Dr. McNeil. Mr. Montague. Ms. Nito. Mr. Paulwell. Mr. Michael Phillips. Dr. Phillips. Mr. Pickersgill. Mr. Redmond. Mr. James Robertson. Mr. Robertson. Mr. Robinson. Mrs. Robinson. Mr. Samuda. Mr. Shaw. Mr. Spencer. Mr. Stewart. Mr. Terry Long. Reverend Thwaites. Mr. Tufton. Dr. Tufton. Mr. Daryl Vaz. Oh, he's absent today. Mr. Dwayne Vaz. Mr. Warmington. Dr. Wheatley. Mrs. Williams. Mr. Whittle. Mr. Wright. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, your vote.
Aye.
Thank you.
Members, the motion has been affirmed with 47 people supporting it and 16 absent. Mr. Shimuda.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today. So I invite you to suspend the sitting of the House until next week, Tuesday at 2 p.m. Thank you, Mr.
The motion that the House be now adjourned until the 25th next week, Tuesday at 2 p.m. Those in favour? Those against? As have it. This also stands adjourned.